Today I have a phenomenal guest, and his name is Pedro DoAmaral. He is a biomedical science research student, biotechnology minor, integrative health practitioner, and he's pursuing his career as a scientist. Pedro, it's an absolute pleasure to have you, and welcome to the Heal Your Natural Wellness podcast.
Thank you, Astrid. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. All right, so as usual, we're just going to go right in, and Pedro, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how did it all start with wanting to be in the biomedical science research, arena, biotechnology, and all that good stuff. Why don't you tell us how did it all start?
So I started at a pretty young age. My father first brought me to a Aikido gym, which is a Japanese martial arts. And I learned how to do meditation at a very young age of 4 to 5 years old. And it set me on the path that was considered at the time alternative medicine. At the time, I didn't know the difference. I was just a kid. As I grew into my teenage years, I got interested in science and nutrition. And then finally, when I got into college, I started to pursue biology as a bachelor's degree. Unfortunately, at the time, I had a dog and a cat that also got sick. They died from complications, and that really left an impact on me to never want to feel helpless in somebody that I care for, whether it was my pets or my family. So I started to pursue things at a deeper level, trying to understand how is it that we prescribe these medicines and it can't help in dire situations. Why can't we figure out the cure for cancer? Things like that. And I got slowly involved into biology at a deeper level, biochemistry, biophysics, the anthropology of medicine, and so on. And at one point, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I moved here. I live with my partner now in Florida, and I decided to pursue a biomedical degree. Fortunately, the biomedical degree that I'm doing now at Kaiser University also encompasses biotechnology. It's like a clumped in of 2 bachelor programs into one. So I get both the lab experience and at the same time, the biomedical experience. And hopefully in the future, I plan to pursue biophysics as a graduate degree. I really think the physics side of things is where most of the answers are going to come to questions we're trying to answer at the moment.
Excellent. That's pretty neat. And it's admirable. It's for most of us, biochemistry, all that is pretty complex. I've seen your posts, very detailed, in depth. So we're going to be talking about all of that, guys, today. We're going to geek out. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. So let's jump to the first question. In one of your posts, you were talking about why is mitochondria disease the key in determining factor in modern diseases? I don't know if I kind of ordered that backwards.
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
With mitochondria, basically the main thing that people have to take away from this is we know that genes, or the genetic theory of life, is that genes express themselves. And from that expression, we have what's called a phenotype. A phenotype is a fancy word for just saying what we look like, what is presented. So somebody with brown eyes has a phenotype of brown eyes. Somebody with blue eyes has a phenotype of blue eyes. But the genes that get expressed or aren't expressed or suppressed depends on the energy available, communication with biochemistry between signaling receptors, all of these things. The main thing is the energy. The only thing that provides energy in the human body are mitochondria. Without this energy, DNA can't be transcribed, and then it can't be translated to produce those gene expressions. So right there and then, it tells you that mitochondria, and because of their influence on energy or bioenergetics, influence most of what's going to happen with a phenotype that somebody might present. The thing with mitochondria and modern diseases, which scientists have been investigating since the 1970s, during the 1970s, it was considered the golden age of mitochondrial research. There was a bunch of publications coming out, but in fact, now we've accomplished the amount of publications they had then in about a period of 1 month. So a lot of time and energy has been invested into mitochondrial research at the moment for good reason. One main thing that determines these modern diseases and why we see such a disparity with people that don't have genetic mutations, but still present with Alzheimer's, still present with metabolic syndrome, still present with optic neuropathy, all of these things that can look like they're not related, but actually are related, is thanks to mitochondria and something called heteroplasmy. So heteroplasmy just means that there's mutations within mitochondrial DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Mitochondria, just like our cells and our nucleus, also contain their own DNA, or the mitochondrial genome. The thing is, it's mixed in between their own DNA and our DNA. So we've started to incorporate some of mitochondria's DNA into our own. Not all of them, though. The mitochondria still code for 13 essential proteins that are the key to energy production. So all of this energy production that dictates genomic expression, they still have control over them. So if you have mutations in mitochondria, you're going to have a problem with bioenergetics, and then that'll lead to a problem with genotypes or phenotypes. So the heteroplasmy is a main key in determining this. When somebody has a lot of heteroplasmy, they tend to have mitochondrial dysfunction and present with something like Alzheimer's. Somebody with little heteroplasmy doesn't have the same effect. You can accumulate heteroplasmy as you age. You can accumulate heteroplasmy from parents, and it can be passed down through generations. And over time, it might present with a completely different phenotype, like somebody with blue eyes might have been because heteroplasmy was there in the first place. But it takes time, and in the moment, it may look like it's a disorganized kind of history where the heteroplasmy is just accumulating to this point, accumulating all of these diseases, autism, ADHD, and maybe something good will come out of it in the end. And that's what we call homoplasmy, when all of the mitochondria and their DNA match each other. But at the moment, it's not looking that way. So here's the thing. Every cell in your body has a degree of heteroplasmy. The degree in which heteroplasmy is present, if it's really high in one specific subset of cells, can present as a disease there. So if you had too much heteroplasmy in your kidneys, maybe you're going to have nephrotic syndrome. If you had too much heteroplasmy in your brain, maybe you'll have something like ALS. It depends on the degree of heteroplasmy, right? So that is why mitochondria are key. There's one more aspect of this, and it's the fact that mitochondria mutate about 6 to, I think it is 17 times faster than our own genome mutates. The epigenetics that we talk about, how the environment plays a role in our cells, first happens with mitochondria. And then they tell our cells what's going on and how to deacetylase or methylate so that we can epigenetically modify our genes to what is needed. It's all thanks to mitochondria.
Oh, wow. That's pretty interesting. So how do we enhance, or what are ways to enhance mitochondria function, or,
Same ways that you enhance energetics, the way your body produces energy, the way that you're able to feel throughout the day. If you feel like you're sluggish and you're fatigued, or you have some kind of problem, likely you have mitochondrial dysfunction. All that you need to focus on is improving energy production. And that right there and then will take care of all of the fancy biochemistry that you could get deep into. Improvement of cyclin D1, improvement of mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial autophagy, mitophagy, all of these things. All you have to do is focus on the lifestyle factors, nutritional factors, and providing all the necessary nutrients. Your body will take care of the rest. One great way to do this, for example, is an intermittent fast once a week or twice a week. Automatically triggers certain biochemical procedures that tell your body to generate new mitochondria and also consume the old ones that have a high degree of heteroplasmy. So that improves your bioenergetics right there.
So just real quick, I'm sorry to cut you off. So just one day of intermittent fasting will do it.
There isn't a real study. There isn't like a real study looking at that in specific, but it's without a doubt something that occurs all the time. One day of fasting can still have a remarkable degree in improvement of mitochondria.
That's awesome. I was just good. The reason why I ask is, like, for our listeners is, a lot of times some of us are doing intermittent fasting for, 3-4 times a week. But look, just by what Pedro's saying, there is a study saying that only one time a week could have really good positive impact in mitochondria.
Right. Yeah.
So just so you know, if you've never intermittent fasted before and you want to start, obviously do your little research first or talk to your naturopathic doctor. Just try it, right? It doesn't hurt, even if it's just most of us will, if you go to sleep and you sleep if you get at least 8-9 hours, you'll be automatically kind of like intermittent fasting, right? So just try it, and see how it goes. All right. Thank you so much for answering that. We're going to move on to the next question. So in your stories, you have, or actually one of your highlights, you have vitamin D and obesity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the issue with cholesterol, vitamin D absorption for overweight, obese individuals, and how cold thermogenesis helps, and maybe, and perhaps if you have another protocol that could help. I know that was a lot
Yeah.
of one, but
No, I got it. I'll start with cholesterol basically. So cholesterol can become a form of cholesterol known as dihydrocholesterol, and it sits on the surface of your skin, where when UVB light from the sun, ultraviolet B light from the sun hits it, the cholesterol gets converted to pre-vitamin D3, the active form. When you have too high cholesterol, this may happen in excess. Your body still has to utilize that vitamin D for specific purposes. If somebody is obese, the vitamin D actually gets shuttled into the fat cells, because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin and they are lipophilic, like they love fat. That's really what the word lipophilic means. So they get stored in the fat cells, the adipocytes. That can lead to vitamin D deficiency. So even if somebody is going out and getting sun and that cholesterol is being converted, they don't get the right amount of vitamin D because
Mhm.
it's just being shuttled to the fat cells. The in contrast, if it was somebody that was not obese, but they had metabolic syndrome, the vitamin D may be upregulating the amount of calcium being pulled in from the diet or from the bones or from the teeth or from other tissue. And then you have a high serum calcium, but you're not getting it into where it needs to be, which is intracellular. You don't want it in your blood. You want it to be used by cells or to go to the right tissue, like your bones and your teeth.
Right.
So when they convert this cholesterol to vitamin D, they're actually getting a detrimental effect. Then your body sees that there is a problem with the cholesterol, or somebody may be hypothyroidic, like most obese patients are, or most diabetic patients are, and it can seem like they have really high cholesterol, which isn't good. And it's just feeding this vicious cycle: the vitamin D being created, the cholesterol going high, shuttled to fat cells, or pulling too much calcium and not being utilized effectively. The key with this also happens to be vitamin K2, which helps to take care of both factors. Vitamin K2 improves mitochondrial function. It then increases the conversion of the thyroid hormones through what's called deiodinase enzymes. It's basically how thyroid gets converted to active form and then deactivated after. Vitamin K2 prevents the calcification of soft tissue. So if you have too much calcium in your blood, it takes care of that. And we don't really get a lot of vitamin K through our diet. With also obese patients, the fat cells start to produce adipokines, which are basically cytokines from the fat cells that can be pro-inflammatory. And vitamin D is used as a mediator for that. So that can be another good thing about vitamin D, that most obese patients wouldn't get, because their fat cells are sequestered to vitamin D.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was reading that on the stories like when I was putting this together, and it was just fascinating to know that you were saying that even if you go out there and get enough safe sun exposure,
Mm-hmm.
you're still not getting adequate levels of vitamin D, vitamin D, because of this situation. So how can someone change that, or like how can we turn that around? Is there like a particular, I think you were talking about, so we're talking
So
about
this cold thermogenesis, right?
right.
Yeah, so the cold thermogenesis, there's bacteria, or honestly, it's both bacteria and animals in general, eukaryotes, prokaryotes. These are the domains. Both of them exhibit what's called cold shock proteins, also heat shock proteins when it's too hot. But cold shock proteins have a effect on, again, the bioenergetics, the mitochondria, where they trigger what's called uncoupling. And what happens is your mitochondria starts to produce energy. It starts to produce heat from the energy you take in. It can use the fat that's stored in the fat cells, the fatty acids, for that energy production. And so you're liberating fatty acids, you're increasing heat production, your white adipocytes start to become what's called brown adipocytes, brown fat. And this cycle just increases, where your energy rate, metabolic rate and metabolism starts to go up. That then releases vitamin D from the fat cells, because you're using the fatty acids, and then it can do its job, and your vitamin D levels should improve over time. So cold thermogenesis helps with that immediately. If you ever go into like a cold shower, you go for 30 seconds, you feel like you're hyperventilating, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it stops being cold. It stops being less cold, and then you're less cold and less cold and less cold over time. And then when you get out the shower, you just feel warm, you're hot. This could be from the uncoupling action of mitochondria. You're producing more heat because you're utilizing more of the substrates for the metabolic process.
Oh, that is so spectacular. So I was just gonna say, like, for someone who doesn't have a way to, for example, get into a tub with like a lot of ice, or like,
Mm-hmm.
how if you're not able to go to a place where they have, this type of therapy,
Yeah.
what I've been doing is I basically end my shower with a cold shower. So, if I think that's right, would that be something that works?
Yeah. Yeah,
If
that
you don't,
does.
if you don't
It
have a
def
place to.
it, it definitely does. I don't know the extent to which it may help. I don't know like a one specific study that showed this versus that, but I'm positive it does. You're getting some exposure, even for 30 seconds once a day. It's helpful. And if you're doing exercise in conjunction with the cold therapy or cryotherapy or cold thermogenesis, whatever you want to call it, if you're taking care of your nutrition, if you're making sure you're helping your excretory functions like your bowel movements, your kidneys and their filtration, the liver, and so on, there's no way you won't start to reduce cholesterol because you're actually getting rid of it through bile salts. You're going to improve your vitamin D levels and in general improve your mitochondria.
Gotcha. So ideally, you do want to go to somewhere cryotherapy, or what's ideal to
I
get this
think
really going?
I think because so many people find themselves in a position where they don't have the ability to do cryotherapy, they don't have a large tub or a big yard to do cold thermogenesis. Just hop in a cold shower; it's free, and you're taken care of. Honestly.
Right. That's what I thought. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, you heard it. Start getting in those cold showers. It feels a little bit uncomfortable at first, just a tad. But listen, anything that's worth it, it could be uncomfortable. So definitely give it a shot. Awesome. Thank you for answering that. We're gonna move to our next question. Um, why don't we talk about photobiomodulation and
Okay.
how it can alter one's biology?
So photobiomodulation just means you're using light to alter your biology. Every part of your mitochondria has what's called the electron transport chain. It's literally how a flow of energy goes. Electricity just goes right through this transport chain. They are sensitive to light. You have things like complex 1, cytochrome C, the ATP synthase, which generates ATP. They all can be upregulated with light. They have an affinity for different light, and this is the spectrum basically from visible light to infrared, UV light, and so on. When you use photobiomodulation, most of it is utilizing infrared light. The reason why is because these complexes sit within water, a type of gel water, what's basically called the cytosol of the cell, and the water gets energized from the infrared light. When you shine infrared light onto water, it starts to heat up. This heat then produces a transfer of energy that's lost in the electron transport chain to upregulate the enzymes and the complexes so that you can produce more energy. That then improves mitochondrial function, and then that shows up with, once again, a phenotype in the body. So somebody does infrared light for their skin elasticity. They have a scar, they want to get rid of it. It improves the destruction of fibrolytic proteins and fibrotic cells within the scar tissue area, and then you get better collagenous repair, and then the scar is gone. But that's all thanks to the mitochondria, because the light directly affects the energy metabolism of mitochondria. Every light has an affinity, every enzyme, every protein has an affinity for a specific wavelength of light. Some of them can be really detrimental, like too much UVC can cause a lot of problems. It can completely degrade the DNA structure, for example, because it's ionizing. But things like infrared light, which is much, much, much longer wavelength, are not as ionizing. They're non-ionizing, in fact. And that can be why you can use infrared light without any issues whatsoever.
Wow, that's incredible. So yeah, for those of you that are listening, there are actually spots where you could actually go and have a session of infrared light. If you cannot get to one, I'm gonna actually put some links in Pedro's dedicated page where it says show notes where you could potentially get one, and find ways to potentially be exposed. It's very important. I know it's infrared light is healing, and for many aspects, right? It has a lot of healing benefits in terms
Yeah.
of like, anti-inflammatory, right? Is that, I think
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
reading something about
Uh,
that.
it can increase inflammation in the short term and then increases anti-inflammatory factors. And what you get is a net benefit from it where it improves whatever you're looking to improve.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. So we're going to go to the next. We're moving along pretty quick. So what on you in one of your posts, I was reading something that really caught my attention, and one on Instagram, the gallbladder's incredible role in systemic health.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
had like a little list of things discussed, and something really caught my attention, which I wanted to see if you could emphasize on estrogen dominance, gallstones, and bile, liver, and CYP450, which I'm not sure what it is, but I know you're going to explain it. Impairment leading to excess estrogen. I was really interested in that. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
All right, so let me start with CYP450. So it looks like an intimidating term. All it means is a specific subset of enzymes, usually presented within the liver and specific for detoxification. They are what allows the transfer of molecules from toxic to non-toxic so that it can be excreted by your body. CYP enzymes are numerous. I mean, you have hundreds of them, if not thousands, and they perform each specific functions. When you have this regulation of CYP enzymes or something is a competitive inhibitor of it, it can disrupt the normal flow of liver metabolism. This then affects the gallbladder. When your gallbladder is affected, things really start to happen in terms of hormonal health, dysregulation of hormone metabolites just not being processed through your body. Everything gets processed by the liver, goes to the gallbladder secretes bile. When bile is thick and it pushes back against the bile that's coming from the liver, it can create a condition known as cholestasis. It's just basically stagnant bile and it's not flowing out. Then this builds up and the cholesterol can form deposits with other minerals to form gallstones. Then you're going to have gallstones in the gallbladder that just can't be eliminated properly, all because your liver is malfunctioning due to these CYP enzymes being malfunctioned. It can be from a host of different things. This then prevents the proper conversion of thyroid hormones. And your thyroid heavily relies on the liver, among other organs, but mainly the liver for conversion into an active form. If it doesn't get converted into an active form, you're going to be hypothyroidic. Your cholesterol increases. And then this feeds a vicious cycle of more cholesterol within the liver and gallbladder, more gallstones. This increases the amount of estrogen circulating throughout your body because your liver isn't able to eliminate it because you have the cholestasis going on. And that combined into thyroid receptors, which also, so if estrogen binds to the thyroid receptors because of molecular mimicry, the thyroid hormones can't activate. And then you have a reduction in thyroid hormones. And then this vicious cycle continues. And then you have a worsening of symptoms and so on. And this can go on and on and on and on until somebody gets a cholecystectomy or their gallbladder removed. And then they finally feel a little bit better. But then there's another problem with that. Once you get that surgery for your gallbladder, you're not secreting as much bile because your gallbladder was supposed to store bile in a concentrated form up to 5 times, sometimes 10 times as much. That bile is necessary for fat digestion, preventing fat lipid peroxidation, which is like you heard of reactive oxygen species, how bad they can be for you. Right. Peroxidation of fat is even worse, and that can happen in your intestine. So bile helps with that. Yeah, so bile also helps prevent microorganisms from growing inside of your intestine. It has a specific pH to regulate things. Bile is important for reuptake of fat-soluble vitamins. Without enough bile, you're not going to absorb vitamin D, vitamin K2, vitamin A, vitamin E. So all those start to be reduced, and then you have a clinical effect with a bunch of cells that may present with vitamin D deficiency or vitamin E deficiency, which can increase the peroxidation I just mentioned. And that's not good at all. Your heart starts to worsen. It just feeds onto this vicious cycle, all thanks to gallbladder health not being taken care of. So this one organ, they call a vestigial organ, meaning like they think it doesn't matter anymore. It's there. We evolved with it and it no longer matters because if we take it out, we're still able to survive. While that's true, the thriving of an individual is reduced immediately because you're not digesting, once again, these fats, you're not increasing fatty acid metabolism, you're not breaking down estrogen effectively. All of these things happen. One way people can tell if they have a gallbladder issue is if they feel like they have right-sided shoulder pain because the gallbladder pushes into a nerve called the phrenic nerve once it's inflamed. And that phrenic nerve runs all the way up to the right side. So they may feel right side of neck tension, right side of shoulder pain, all these things, right? Just from the gallbladder being inflamed. When you go and get an ultrasound, even if it shows no stones are there, they can still have cholecystitis, or basically inflammation of the bile ducts. And the liver can be inflamed because of this, because bile starts to flow back up. You don't want that. You want bile to flow down.
Right.
And that can present as an enzyme called gamma glutamyl transpeptidase, GGT is the abbreviation, and that starts to increase. So when you do a blood test, you can check for that. So there's a bunch of ways to determine it, but a bad gallbladder affects fat-soluble vitamins, affects your thyroid, affects estrogen metabolism, affects almost everything.
As you're talking about all this, I'm concerned because actually my sister had she started with the stones. What is it called?
The gallstones.
Gallstones, yeah. And then she consequently ended up with surgery where they removed the gallbladder. It just got so bad. And as I'm listening to everything you're saying, I'm like, so for someone who had their gallbladder removed, I know you have a section that says, how to live, or something like living without a gallbladder. What can you suggest so they could have a little bit, quality of life without a gallbladder, a better quality of life?
The first thing is you're going to want to look at digestion, because you're going to have a lot of people that have gotten their gallbladder removed tend to have problems with SIBO, for example, because the pH of the intestine isn't regulated anymore. So improving digestive health is number one. Taking bile acids or ox bile salts, all of these things basically are a mimic of bile to help you digest fats and help the intestine stay in good health. You're going to have to take that for the rest of your life because you're not producing as much. You produce a little bit, but it's not in a concentrated form anymore. The next thing you can do is reduce your fat intake in food, because if you eat too much fatty foods, it's going to upset your stomach. You don't have the ability to digest it properly. Even if you supplement it with bile salts, you're still not going to get the same effect as if you did with your own gallbladder.
Wow.
The other thing you can do is improve liver function, because the liver, once again, works in conjunction with the gallbladder. The gallbladder is no longer there. There's going to be some changes biochemically to the liver. So focusing on liver health is important. With fat-soluble vitamins, you're going to have to supplement, because you don't have as great as an affinity as you did before, with bile not being there to absorb these things. So one good way to use it is with liposomal formulas. Even though I'm not really 100% a fan of liposomals, they can still help in this case because they're encoded in fat lipoparticles that can be absorbed by your cell. That's why liposomal supplements work so fast and at a very low dose.
It goes right through into the cell,
exactly.
right? Like that's how it works. Mm-hmm.
Bingo. And so that can help with the general life after having a gallbladder removed, but it won't really say bring somebody back to 100%. You're missing a really important organ inside of your body that's considered vestigial because of medical knowledge. It's not necessarily the truth. If it was fully vestigial, the body still wouldn't utilize the gallbladder for biochemical purposes. It would be just an inert organ, but that's not the case.
Wow, guys, this is really interesting. And so it leads me to ask, like, why would they remove the gallbladder? Is that like a last resort? Or can we still, I always think, or I was reading somewhere that you don't have to remove the gallbladder, but in conventional medicine, that's their first plan of action. I don't know. Is that like a last resort, or that's just what they think works initially?
I may be mistaken on this, but I know I'm not mistaken that it's one of the most widely performed surgeries. I'm pretty sure it's the number one most widely performed surgery ever. Wow. So it's become this thing where it's like, oh, you got a gallbladder issue. You don't even have stones. Let's just take it out. You don't need it. You have stones. Oh, we need to take it out. Oh, you have a gallbladder morphology problem. Let's take it out. So it's so common now that we're just taking it out. I would assume based on just medical dogma, not based on scientific literature and knowledge behind it. I think this came to be, I forget when the first gallbladder surgery was. It might have been sometime around 1800s, but it started to increase exponentially around the 1960s and 70s. I think a large part of that is because also a lot of people started getting more obese, and the obesity curve has been increasing, the diabetes curve. All of these diseases can contribute to gallstone formation, and likewise, gallbladder dysfunction can contribute to these diseases. So it's like a connection between both of them. If you benefit one, right, you get the other improve. And I don't think there has been enough discussion. There's been plenty of science in terms of what the gallbladder does and why it's still important, but there hasn't been enough discussion with agencies and the American Medical Association, for example, on maybe we should rethink taking out gallbladder so commonly. Maybe we should start looking into improving the gallbladder if it has gallstones, for example. But none of that has been discussed, in my opinion, from what I know.
Yeah, I haven't heard any of that. Like, I was doing a little research. I actually wrote an article a while ago on removing or getting rid of, excuse me, gallstones. But when this whole thing happened to my sister, and the reason why I mention it is because I know people out there are listening. I started getting really concerned, and I was actually like, don't let them remove it. Try to work around it, so on and so forth. So for someone who has gallstones right now, Pedro, who's dealing with this, because the pain from gallstones,
yeah, I know, it's very
severe
painful
from what I hear, right? So what would you suggest for them to do right now? Someone who's listening with severe gallstone pain and bile dysfunction, gallbladder dysfunction, things like that, what would you suggest for them to do?
I would start first by going on low-fat diet, because fat is going to trigger the release through a specific hormone called cholecystokinin. It triggers the gallbladder to release bile. And if it has gallstones, it's going to contract, and you're going to get that inflammation, thus the pain that you feel with it. Low-fat diet at the moment. You also don't want to eat too much carbohydrates. You want to really be more of a caloric deficit when it comes to things like this. Your body's going to start breaking things down and push things out. Second, there's an herb that you can called chanca piedra, which is actually, I think it's Chilean or Bolivian herb, or maybe from just in general South America, and it literally just means stone breaker. It's used for kidney stones, it's used for gallstones. There has been science that's been done specific on it, but there's plenty of old, I would say the right term is just like it's been passed down through generations of these cultures that chanca piedra, just these leaves from this plant, help break down stones. That has been a useful thing that I'm sure other people have used aside from myself. You want to increase you want to decrease, the viscosity of your blood, of your plasma, of the bile, because if it's too viscous, it's going to become stagnant and it can't flow out. So drinking more water throughout the day is important. Mm-hmm. You can utilize things like copper and zinc in specific amounts. You don't want to overdo it, to improve the function of CYP enzymes. You can increase the amount of green vegetables, which also have an effect on the liver to break down the gallstones over time. Apple cider vinegar with malic acid is really effective at helping reduce gallstones. So all of these things can help if you massage with somatic massages around the liver area, and you do lymph massages, lymph releases around the liver and the gallbladder. That's going to help with over time too. So that's all a few things that you can do to benefit when it comes to your gallbladder and prevent the stone formations, and also prevent the gallbladder attacks that cause so much pain. It's not going to be immediate though. This is going to take time. It can take, I worked for somebody when I was a personal trainer, and he had gallstones. He had a 2 centimeter size stone, and I told him to do pretty much these same things. Ouch. It took him 6 months for it to be completely gone, but he stuck with it. He never got the surgery he was going to. 6 months later, it was completely gone through an ultrasound that he did.
Wow, that's incredible. You see, like with anything that it's with the natural medicine or alternative holistic, it's usually going to be in the long run. You're not going to get immediate results like conventional medication just masks the symptoms and you get like an immediate relief.
Yeah.
But you're not addressing what we always talk about. We sound like a broken record, but root cause, right? We want to address the root cause of your issue, and that's how you're going to eventually get rid of it. Awesome. I wanted to mention something. I know that when you said to thin the blood, I know that when you donate blood, when you donate blood, your blood kind of like regenerates or something like that. So would that be something that someone could do to help thin the blood and like kind of like get a fresh start?
So when you donate blood, you lose blood volume, but it doesn't mean necessarily that the blood becomes less viscous, because viscosity can still be maintained. What you really want to do is increase the what's called Zeta Potential. Zeta Potential is a fancy term for the blood cells don't clump together. They repel each other. They have this electromagnetic repulsion. And to improve that, you want to have a proper electrolyte balance, proper amount of water throughout the day. You don't want to consume too many fats. You don't want to consume too much carbohydrates either, because they can all affect the Zeta Potential. Everything needs to be in a right balance. So donating blood can help with reducing blood volume, but it isn't necessarily going to reduce blood viscosity. I have one thing about blood donations that I've never done after I found this out, and I also don't ever want to get a transfusion if I had to, unless it was a life-threatening situation. It's the fact that there's a lot of pathogens that are not tested for with blood transfusions and blood donations. People have Epstein-Barr virus, human endogenous retroviruses, they have Babesia, and those things just go completely unnoticed in blood samples, and they're just pumped into other people if they need a transfusion. You may be taken out of view. We don't know who the individual is, and they don't even know that they have this problem. So that's one thing I don't recommend. You don't want to add to the pool of the already present problem.
You're talking about blood transfusions or blood, or donating blood?
Blood withdrawal, exactly.
Withdrawal, same deal that you could
same deal.
When they withdraw blood. Oh, it's going through. Wait, no, I'm confused.
So if, say I was sick and I didn't know it, say I had Babesia from Lyme co-infections, they withdrew blood from me. They couldn't test for Babesia unless they did a very specific test. If they look for the stain of Babesia cells, which they're not going to do. And then that blood sample just sits there for somebody else to acquire if they need a transfusion, then that person gets Babesia.
You're talking about blood transfusions. I get it. Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. I've never been a fan of it, of blood transfusions. And yeah, knowing what we know now with like pathogens, all kinds of things, you definitely want to be careful. I mean, if you get into an accident and you absolutely have to, I guess you have no choice, God forbid, but
yeah, that's a completely different scenario.
Gotcha. All right. So thank you so much for answering that.
No problem.
Now we're going to move to the next question. We kind of this was going to be about vitamin K2, which we already addressed. I guess real quick, we could go over, let's see. One of your posts, it said it's required for bacterial respiration and strongly supports electron transfer to mitochondria and matrix, all these things, right? So vitamin K, it's so important for so many aspects, right? So why don't you tell us just quickly about this list that you have over there? And I mean, quickly, I know it's probably going to be pretty in-depth.
No problem, but, I get it.
Some of it, and some of the foods where we find vitamin K2.
All right. So vitamin K2 is part, so every eukaryote and every prokaryote has some form of a mitochondria or chloroplast. They are the main energy producers. So because of that, they also have similar electron transport chains. The electron transport chain is where vitamin K2 operates on. It's similar to CoQ10. You've heard about CoQ10, right? And how good it is for the heart. It's similar to that. Yeah. It's almost indistinguishable because they're very similar compounds. Vitamin K2 is what's called menaquinone. It can mirror the quinone.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, from CoQ10. So it's used in bacterial electron transport chain respiration. That's why when you use specific antibiotics that target vitamin K2, it can disrupt the bacterial flow of energy, and thus the bacteria dies. That's how the antibiotics work against K2. But K2 can also help us because it's an electron donor. And anything that's an electron donor is going to help the electron transport chain. This is how electrons flow. Once again, they donate the electrons. It's just flowing through this transport chain. And because of this, when you consume vitamin K2, you tend to have benefits to the mitochondria. There's increases in cyclin D1, which it can increase the mitochondrial biogenesis. You have more mitochondria now within cells per cell, so mitochondrial density increases. It can improve the general cascade of anti-inflammatory processes. It reduces excess inflammation. So there's a lot of benefits from vitamin K2. The thing is, we're not really acquiring it from our diet. Even if we did consume enough cheese, you have to consume like a block of Parmesan cheese to actually get the necessary amount, which may be 1 milligram. It's so little that it isn't produced or it isn't created as often in bacteria for us to consume. So natto, which is a source of vitamin K2, is
Fermented.
MK7. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's still not enough. You're getting around 800 micrograms, if I'm not mistaken. The studies that they've done where they've seen benefits for the heart and prevention of calcification of heart muscles was around 45 milligrams. So you're looking at 45 times what you're getting in a block of cheese or in natto, for example, in one bowl of natto. So it's very difficult to actually get the required amount to see some benefits. Over time, though, you can have what basically like an inclination, like a curve's going up because you're consuming it on a daily basis. It is a fat-soluble vitamin. It gets stored. It doesn't just get used and excreted properly. Immediately. And so it can build up over time. So if you're eating these foods that are high in K2, like liver, like red meat, like cheese, like natto, they all come in some varieties from MK2 to MK14, which all have their own roles. Then you're going to increase your vitamin K endogenous content over time. That can be helpful. And then that also helps with regulating all of the other fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin E.
Excellent. Nice. So I wanted to mention something that which you kind of talked about before, and I learned. So what one of the roles of vitamin K2 is to move that calcium out of the areas where you don't want them, like the arteries,
Mm-hmm.
into the places that you want them, like the bones, your
Yeah.
teeth, and right. So it's very important to keep this in mind. I'm going to add, there is a supplement that it's actually from Seeking Health, one of my favorite companies. It's vitamin D3 with vitamin
With
K2.
K2.
So that it's like bomb. I think it's a great combination. So I will add a link for you guys to find it. And so thank you, Pedro.
That's
I'm
by
sorry.
Dr. Ben Lynch, right?
That's by Ben Lynch. Yes.
Yeah, he's great. He's great.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. He's he's the products are really, really awesome. And so I've always, that's how I learned about one of the best sources of vitamin D was theirs, because their vitamin D3 is in a base, an olive oil base. Most of the vitamin D3 out there, it's in omega-6, based on omega-6 oils, like sunflower and safflower and stuff like that. And you don't want that. We already consume enough oils. When you go out to eat, you may not know, but they're not going to cook with avocado oil or olive oil. Most of the times it's just vegetable oil. So always keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, that they're not cooking with the best oils. So anyway, thank you for answering that, Pedro. Let's move on to the next question. So let's talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and what are the best and fastest ways to reverse it. So I just wanted to read something real quick from one of your posts, and I always like to read a little bit of statistics. So epidemiological data states about 20% of the U.S. population, got it, 90% of obese patients undergoing bariatric surgery have been found to have its more sinister version, NASH. 80% of metabolic syndrome patients have it as well. Think obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. And so you mentioned the study. So, it seems that it's actually very common. A lot of people don't know that they have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because sometimes you don't have any symptoms, right? You also talk about some of the medications, and then fructose, I guess you could talk about that. So I actually was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and I have, like I always talk about, as of recently, my podcasts, I try to be very transparent. Like I've always dealt with the weight, and I've been doing a lot of like A/B testing, because with me, the culprit is the sleep. My circadian rhythms were messed up from at an early age, I believe, because my mom had a business, we stayed up late, whatever, and it consequently affected me. I've always been active, in fact, I overdid it in 2018 when I was going to the gym like 5 times a week for like 3 hours, when they gave me the green light, because I have a hernia disc. So I always talk about these things, and it was kind of refreshing to see in one of your posts, especially that one with the vitamin D and the cholesterol, that sometimes even if you try to do your best, if you're not doing it correctly, or even if you're trying to do it correctly, it's like you already have either predisposition, like my family, uh, from my parents to my grandparents and great grandparents, they're all diabetic. So they were all they all had diabetes. So I always tested, for prevention for years since I got to this country. I got here when I was 19. I'm going to be 45. And I started testing, my morning glucose and stuff like that. And I was always pre-diabetic, even though I was a former athlete as well. You know what I mean? So it's like, but It doesn't matter. You could change it. So I deviated a little bit, but go ahead, Pedro. Why don't you tell us about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and some of the ways you can potentially reverse it?
Let's start actually from right where you said that even though you were doing all of these things that benefited your health, you're still pre-diabetic for so long. Pre-diabetes is categorized mainly by blood sugar. It should be categorized more by insulin resistance. But if your blood sugar is too high for a long period of time, it may mean that your body's not utilizing the blood sugar. It may mean that your body's creating too much blood sugar because it needs glucose for some reason. That tends to be the case with people that have metabolic syndrome, which non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, falls under. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, that's what we're going to abbreviate it for now because it's a long term. It's basically fat accumulation within the liver that otherwise will only be present if you consume too much alcohol. That's why it's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. When that happens, your liver isn't able to process things effectively, like toxins, glucuronidation, conjugation. All of these things do not work as effectively as they would if the fat was there. It's unable to utilize glucose as fuel effectively, and so it may upregulate the creation of glucose, and that's why you have that always high blood sugar that's pre-diabetic. It cannot utilize fatty acids effectively because it's storing the fat into these fat cells within the liver. And that creates all of these conditions where you have too much fat circulating, too much blood sugar circulating, glycation, peroxidation, all of these inflammatory processes start to take place because your liver has become, in a sense, a fatty liver. So one of the ways that you can reduce this is by improving lipolysis. Lipolysis is just a breakdown of fat, and the hormones that regulate, like hormone-sensitive lipase, which regulates the amount of free fatty acids that are going to get used by your body. Fasting can help. That's why fasting has been noted to improve a fatty liver almost faster than anything else.
Really?
A low fructose diet can help because fructose tends to increase, not by much. I have to give credit to the researchers. There isn't a high increase of fat from consuming too much fructose. But if you consume it over a period of time, that fat, if it's not being utilized, is just going to build and build and build and build before you know what, you have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So reduction of fructose for a while can help. But at the same time, reduction of fats, a low-fat diet can also help. It really is dependent on the individual and how they feel with a specific plan. It's never like a one-set thing where you have to do it this way to remove your non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. However, it's one of the conditions that are most easily and most quickly reversible in comparison to something like, say, diabetes, which takes a little bit longer. So you can see progress within like a month span if you do an ultrasound before and after by implementing like fasting or a low-fat diet, low fructose diet, whatever you want to do for you that works, and it can have dramatic benefits. And if your liver's better, which we already talked about, the gallbladder, your thyroid's going to be better, your fat utilization is going to be better, your fat-soluble vitamins are going to be used for the right purposes, and so on. Everything gets better if you improve your liver.
Absolutely. Yeah. The liver is such a, crucial organ. Like I when I was reading some of your posts, and from what I know, including when I was diagnosed with that, I was kind of shocked because I'm like, obviously it's not alcoholic. So I'm like, the doctor was like, you gotta lay off the wine. I'm like, what? I barely drink. It's like social. And it's like, well, your liver, whatever. So definitely guys, keep that in mind and follow what Pedro's saying. Obviously do your own research. But yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. So we're going to move along. Why don't you tell us about the next question, the connection between iron deficiency and hypothyroidism? Since we're like working through the organs.
Yeah. All right. So iron is used by the body in small amounts. It's not something you want to consume too much of. for the creation of heme proteins, heme enzymes like the CYP450, the liver enzyme we talked about earlier. And those are heme based. Without iron, they're not going to be created. Heme is the protein that basically utilizes iron to hemoglobin, for example, to carry oxygen to where it needs to be. Without enough iron, you have a lower oxygenation rate. If you don't have enough oxygen, you're going to have a reduction of carbon dioxide because you're not respiring. When you breathe out, you're producing carbon dioxide because you're using oxygen as a electron acceptor during the electron chain transport. So without enough oxygen, your carbon dioxide goes down, respiratory exchange ratio goes down. That means you're not utilizing fuel effectively. And then you're going to have problems with metabolism. Those can have side effects in terms of the liver, in terms of the thyroid. And your body's going to notice this. It's going to say, whoa, the metabolism dropped sharply because we don't have enough iron within our body. We're going to have to increase TSH, which is a thyroid stimulating hormone. And when that increases, you know that's a sign that somebody's hypothyroidic. And that then affects the rest of the enzymes that are associated with thyroid function, like deiodinase enzymes. So you have excess TSH, but too little T4, too little T3, maybe too much T2, too high reverse T3. All of these enzymes affect thyroid function. If you have too high reverse T3, that means your body's not creating enough active thyroid hormone to exhibit function like improving your metabolic rate. Then your body's also signals to your liver, we need to increase a hormone called hepcidin, which allows iron absorption in the intestine. And we know that with hepcidin, if it's increased substantially, and there's other proteins involved that need to regulate iron metabolism, those don't tend to be increased proportionally. It tends to cause inflammation in the intestines. And so you have irritable bowel syndrome. You have maybe Crohn's if it's really bad with too much iron accumulation within the intestines. And then you're not producing enough of the heme enzymes. You're not getting oxygen. You start to become fatigued and all of these things. They all play a role in terms of hypothyroidism, because hypothyroidism is also associated with being really tired, with accumulating weight too easily. It's all a compensation by your body to improve the metabolic rate, and it's controlled basically by how much oxygen you're utilizing, how much CO2 you're producing, thanks to iron.
Wow, that's incredible. As I'm listening to all this, I've read about it. I've done a little research myself because of my website. I'm familiar, but for those of you who are not familiar, this might sound very overwhelming. I just wanted to mention and throw it out there that I don't know, Pedro, how if you're taking patients right now, but if you were interested, Pedro takes patients, right? You are, so you can potentially work with him. You will have a link to get in touch with him through his website or whatever he provides, in case you don't know where to go and how to start. You have these symptoms, or potentially you could look up a naturopathic doctor or whatever, functional medicine practitioner, because what they do, and that's what Pedro's also a functional medicine practitioner, correct?
Integrative health practitioner.
Integrative health, yeah. So thank you. So what they do is, and correct me if I'm wrong, they run tests that are actually a lot more elaborate, or Dutch test. I could remember they run all these tests that are not part of the conventional, like just like cookie cutter, right? They'll analyze your situation, your symptoms. They have like a pretty extensive, I'm sure, right, questionnaire, whatever, and that's how they get to the root cause. So it is very important, guys. And yeah, sometimes it's out of pocket, but you will be investing in your health. And I always talk about this in my podcasts. Every penny that you invest in your health is well spent. Believe me, right, Pedro? Because you could go to conventional medicine and they'll just treat you with medication. They'll never address the root cause. So I will put links on the show notes. Pedro, do we have time for one last question?
Yeah, go right ahead. Plenty.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Plenty to say that will be until 1 hour. I have so many questions. I'm just kidding. So
no, go ahead. I'm fine with that.
Awesome. Okay, so in your post, there was a post that it said, are you struggling to lose fat? You may be toxic. So obviously it caught my attention because I've dealt with that. I've been very open about it. People see me out there in the trails, walking, jogging, whatever. I do as much as I can, but it's always good to learn about toxicity and stuff like that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that awesome post that you wrote on struggling to lose fat? Because
So that, yeah, so that post is basically stating that we are encompassed by a milieu of toxins that we just can't overcome. There's no way. For example, me sitting on my chair right now, these things are made with specific chemicals that might be endocrine disruptors. I have my hands on a wooden desk that has a coating over it that might have chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. My coffee in this mug has a coating over the ceramic that might have endocrine disruptors. So it's almost impossible to get away from chemicals. You try your best, and that can help, but it's still never going to be a 100% ordeal. So these chemicals, if they aren't processed effectively by the liver, the kidneys, and so on, some of the organs like the brain even process things with glucuronidation, so on, it can increase the inflammation around those specific tissues. It can increase the endocrine disrupting ability around those specific tissues. And then you have mitochondrial dysfunction, and then the disease becomes present. Your body doesn't want that to happen. So what it does is it sequesters these toxins that it cannot metabolize into fat cells, which are basically, to your body, or to us at the very least, inert cells that really don't matter. Fat cells have an endocrine property to them. They can release specific adipokines that can create a metabolic problem, but at the same time, they're also a storehouse for toxins because they don't have any real function. So that's why your body starts to accumulate fat cells. Fat cells hypertrophize, which basically means they become bigger, or you can create more fat cells. So your body has a larger amount to store the toxins in. And then the person starts to put on weight, and over time, it's just like it gets worse and worse and worse because your body either is overwhelmed with the amount of toxins, or it can't metabolize the amount of toxins present, or at the same time, it could be a combination of both. The way that you can get around this is, I always say, working on your liver and working on your intestine, because those are the main routes of elimination and metabolism of the toxins. When you take antibiotics, when you take vitamins, when you take anything, your liver has to convert those things, unless it's already active, into either less toxic form or active forms. The way you can help that is by focusing on the liver's phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Those require amino acids, B vitamin, glutathione, selenium, sulfur, so on. That'll help your body metabolize these toxins in a much more effective manner and in a higher efficiency, so that you're able to push out everything that's coming in much faster than they can be stored in fat. And then your body's going to be like, oh, we have a better efficiency of metabolizing toxins. Let's liberate some of those things from the fat cells. You're going to start losing weight. And then you can do all the things in the world that are associated with losing weight, whether it's exercise, calorie deficit, specific supplements, specific herbal teas, whatever it is you want to do. You'll start to see benefits then, once your liver is able to metabolize, and then your bowel is able to push things out properly through basically stool.
That's awesome. So how can someone tell that they have toxicity and that may be the reason why they're not losing weight?
So if you're breathing, you're definitely around, and you're in a society, if you live in a city where there's things and cars, you're definitely around toxins. You're around a whole class of toxins, obesogens, which are obesity toxin specific. That's what they call it, obesogens.
Never
You're
heard
around,
of that. What is that?
It's basically a class of toxins that can or are correlated with the increase in obesity. Obesogens tend to make people obese. Basically, that's simple. You're around, I can't remember the name, petrochemicals, basically the car chemicals, the volatile compounds that are released from car exhaust. They're all around you.
Paint, right?
Exactly. So it's numerous. The main thing is if you're able to process them effectively and efficiently enough that it doesn't damage your health. Focusing on the liver, focusing on your bowels, focusing on respiratory function, because your lungs also excrete things. You excrete volatile gases like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Your skin is also a route of elimination when you sweat. All of these things can be really helpful in mitigating this effect. So if you're alive, if you're in a city, you're probably dealing with this. And if you feel like you're gaining weight too much and you can't lose that weight, that could be another sign of this. I would also, whenever it comes to weight, I would also always look at thyroid function, which is dependent on liver health again. Because thyroid helps to improve the metabolic rate. The more you increase your metabolism, the better you're going to utilize fuel substrates and the less you're going to put on fat. People that are hyperthyroidic, for example, they're too active, they're too skinny. They don't actually put on weight easily. So you want to be in that right range, but it's really important to reduce that weight.
Right. That's a really good point, Pedro. What is the, if I'm not mistaken, the optimal range in the not conventional medicine? Because for usually conventional medicine, I don't need to bash, but I'm kind of gonna, they are, what do you call it? They don't, the numbers are usually too high. So what is an optimal range for proper TSH function? Is it between 0.5 and 1? What is it according to you?
It depends on the measurements. There's like so many different ways you can measure with different parameters, whether it's international units or micro units and so on, and per nanomole, per deciliter, per milliliter. It's so different depending on who tests what test and so on. But the range that you really want to be in general, you want a low TSH. You want an optimal level of T3, maybe a little bit higher T4 because it's converting to the T3. That's pretty much what you want to focus on. You want close to no thyroid peroxidase antibodies. You don't want your thyroid to be inflamed. So TPO and all of those things, you want it to be low. The main thing is, even in people that get those tests and they seem to be normal, things could be completely different. I've seen people that were on a carnivore diet whose thyroid function were actually much higher. I've seen people that were on a low carb diet whose TSH levels are much higher, but they were losing weight just fine. So they were considered hypothyroidtic, but they didn't have a problem losing weight. So I don't think we have a accurate description of what those labs actually mean. We have maybe a sort of working basis for what we think is actually happening between those labs and the person. But the best way to really tell is based on your function. Do you have brain fog? Are you putting on weight too easily? Do you have fatigue in general? Then you're probably hypothyroidic.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I could say that, so there is not a range. So when it comes to what I'm trying to understand is, like, if someone is going to work with you, you don't really look at a number. You look at the symptoms, the individual, how they're feeling, their symptoms there, right? It's not
so here's why that's really, really, really important. Biochemical testing came to be when we started to realize these things were present in our bloods, hormones and signaling molecules and so on. And then we shifted from actually doing anatomical tests and investigating personal history, investigating possible links between symptoms. For example, that gallbladder pain also correlating with the right side of shoulder pain, which may direct us to, you have some kind of problem with your gallbladder. You don't have to do just an ultrasound. You can just ask just that and know right off the bat there's something going on there. But over time, from the 1930s and so on, we became less invested in the individual and more invested in the biochemical markers. We prioritize biochemistry without considering that we don't have a full understanding of it in the context of the individual. So I take into consideration the labs. I look at the labs. If I need to order a lab for an individual, I do that as well. But I also make sure that I am not married to what they state with the lab markers saying, if you have this, then you're that. To me, it's dependent on the individual more than anything.
Beautiful. I think that's the way it should be. What is it? Individualized healthcare. That's what we're all looking for, hopefully, in the future. So we're going to wrap it up at this point. Is there anything you wanted to end the podcast with before I close out, Pedro?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I would say most important when it comes to health, just don't give yourself up to somebody as if they know what's better for you. Usually it's your health, it's your life. You wouldn't do that with a loved one where you just say, hey, take my loved one, do what you need to do with them, similar to your health. Have autonomy over your own health and take care of yourself, because that's the most important thing, allowing you to actually do whatever it is you like to do in life, all of your endeavors. Your health is number one. Take that into priority.
Oh, that was beautifully said. Thank you, Pedro. It's so true, guys. Be your own detective. I think that's how Dr. Jess says
Yeah,
it.
be
If
your
I'm
own best doctor.
There you go. Be your own best doctor. Always dig deeper, question everything, like I always mention in the podcast. So this basically concludes the podcast. We've learned a ton. And I just wanted to say, don't forget to connect with Pedro. Visit his Instagram page, his website. You could, his website is pedrodoamaral.com. And his Instagram handle, I'm going to try it, Thucydides.
You got it. Thucydides, Thucydides, Thucydides with an underscore.
Thucydides. Pedro wanted us to really have a hard time learning his name, but I'm going I'm just kidding. It's very original. Guys, don't worry about it. All the links are going to be in the show notes and his dedicated page on my website. You're not going to have a problem finding it. I'm going to tag him when I post it on my social media channels. So guys, this basically concludes the podcast. Don't forget to visit his Instagram page, watch his stories. You're going to learn a ton. And get your pen and paper because you are going to learn a lot. So Pedro, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. You are awesome. And guys, also you're going to have a link so you could get in touch with Pedro if you want to work with him. If he is taking new clients, obviously you sort that out with him, and hopefully we'll see you again on the podcast.
Thanks, Astrid. I appreciate that a lot.
No problem. It was good having you.